Hey everyone, welcome back to the Landslide series, and very, very fun extension to the things we've been doing so far. This lesson, I'm going to talk about playing Travis picking solos kind of in extended positions, things that go a little bit farther up the neck, take things further than we have before. Just in general, if you're improvising, you're going to find your imagination is going to want to go all over the place. And in the last lesson, I talked about how to play things that go further into the bass register while maintaining the Travis picking. Now I'm going to talk about how to go higher up the neck. Because in this lesson, you're not going to have as much problem with the thumb interfering, but you just got to kind of find, positions up the neck, hybrid positions that will give you the notes that you want. So what I'm going to do is systematically go through what would happen if you wanted to play notes in some different areas of the neck, a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here, and then how you would keep the bass line that you've had going whilst, playing melodies in those kind of upper positions. That should open up a lot of cool new possibilities for everyone. I'm really, really excited about this lesson. So that's enough talking. Let's get to it. So I tend to think of there being 6 different areas of extended positions that I want to work on. Well, one of them isn't really an extended position. The thing I kind of start out with in the very first lesson in this sort of advanced series for Landslide, I talked about playing scales kind of down here over sort of first position chords. I think by now, if you've been following along, playing scales with 16th notes, over the Travis picking with any of the kind of standard position, the open position chords, that should be doable for you by now. But as you start to get into these upper position chords, you're going to feel like you're starting all over because things really, really change, both for the right and the left hand. But the first thing you want to make sure you have is the ability to kind of play kind of the normal chord progressions for Landslide, or whatever song it is you're doing, but then be able to kind of keep like one finger down and then play whatever scale it is. We're talking about this G major position. Any kind of scale over that. Make sure you can play that same scale over all the chords, sort of with your fingers in the first position. And that means that if the bass is on the 3rd fret, your ring finger is playing it. The bass is on the 2nd fret, your middle finger is playing it. That pretty much says it for that. That's what makes it the open position. First thing you can do is you can move this whole thing up to the 2nd position. So now you've got your middle finger playing things on the 3rd fret. So the C chord, starting with your pointer finger. And the scale you have for this, you can watch how I play it over the C chord. First, 2nd position, hybrid position. Now, if you move down to the sort of G with the B and the bass, you play the same scale but with a new fingering. And the A minor chord is essentially going to be the same fingering as that G with the B and the bass. One thing I do different is I will, sort of make a bar for this part. When I get up to the the highest string, I'll bar it because with the G with the B and the bass, you need to be able to kind of keep this open D string. But when you're playing the A minor chord, that's not a problem, and it's kind of difficult to keep this arch there and to reach these upper notes. So when you're playing the A minor chord, I'll have my pointer finger on its tip up to there, and as soon as I get to the high E string, I'll flatten it out into a bar. And you can keep it in that, you can play. You could play the whole scale with that finger barred there, but that kind of leaves out the open strings a little bit, so I tend to like to keep it, kind of propped up in an arch if I can. And then you'll take basically the same fingering for the G cycle. Same fingering as for the C chord. The D with the F sharp and the bass is the same fingering as for the G with the B and the bass. With this one exception, I will kind of do like an arched bar. My finger is sort of arched like this so that I can play the open strings here, but I can kind of like hook it down to get that E string so you can hear. It looks like I'm doing a bar, but I'm not. I've got this finger arched like this. Just a little bit, you'll be able to see there. See, I'm playing the open G string there. But I can't really play the B string because it's sort of, you know, it's kind of under that. And then the E string is properly fretted by this section of my finger. This kind of first section of my finger. So you can kind of finger that thing a little bit differently. For the E minor chord, same fingering as the A minor. So those are your second position hybrid positions. Now when you move into the third position, you some chords kind of come out of the picture because, you know, you basically get your pointer finger here on the third fret, and there's no real way to keep that pointer finger on the third fret and, you know, play this, you know, the D with the F sharp or the G with the B or the E minor or any of those. So basically you have the G and the C chord, but you'll see you can reach some notes on the G and the C chord that you couldn't reach otherwise. So if I'm playing the C chord, I've got the open D string, and I start. Now one trick when I play in this position, when I get up, you hear I started to, you know, kind of hit this, you know, muted D string when I tried to kind of do the arch bar for the thin E string. So what I do is I'll switch the Travis pattern to playing the A and the G strings now. So instead of playing these two notes, I'll play these two notes, which still works with the chord. But when I'm playing on the first and the second string, that works better melodically. And so when I get back down to, I'll switch back to playing the open D. Up to the G. And same thing with the G. So you can kind of mess around with those positions. I'll kind of add those to the second position cycles, so I could be improvising like. I'm kind of switching out of being in the second and the third position, and that gives me access to more notes sort of up in this middle area of the neck. The one other trick you can use when you are playing the C and the G chord in the third position is you can kind of cross the fret. You can go. See how I'm kind of fretting the second fret of the E string, but my pointer finger is on the third fret of the A string. Cross fret hybrid position. You can do the same thing with the G chord. And that gives you access to different notes, you know, while you're kind of in this third position. So if you want to be able to switch between going, you know, kind of playing in, it's almost halfway between the second and the third position. It's like a 2.5 position. You can be like, so now I'm kind of all the way in the third position. I can reach. you see how I'm kind of using that 2.5 position by taking this thing that is, I could have this kind of barred across the 3rd fret, but I'm kind of have the pointer finger on the lower strings on the 3rd fret, and then I'm kind of crossing it over to the 2nd fret and leaving the arch under my finger so these, the D and the G string can be open. All right, so that covers the open position, the 2nd position, and the 3rd position. The other big thing that you do a lot is you can use your thumb, especially for the cycle that uses the thick E string more when you're playing the G cycle. You can use the thumb. The advantage of the thumb is always that all 4 fingers are free. So same thing with the D with the F sharp and the bass. It's kind of hard to reach that without. You can do it. So using the thumb is possible here, sort of in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd position area. Another place it's possible to use the thumb, and I would kind of classify this as a different thing entirely, is way up here. You can play the C cycle with the thumb here on, I guess it's on the 11th fret. I'm now thinking sort of like absolute fret rather than relative to the capo. I'm sort of right under the double dot here. Because now I'm playing the C, and I'm using the open D string, but I'm playing the 6th string and the 4th string. So instead of going like I have been to play the C cycle, I'm going, see, it sounds basically the same. Timbre's a little different, but that gives me slide that down 1 fret and keep going. Now I don't find that position to be super difficult. One other position you can get with the thumb here, I guess it's on the 10th absolute fret. It's what is it, 3, 5, 7 up from the capo. You can also kind of turn your hand and play this position that's sort of lower on the neck than the thumb is. Using the open B string there to complete the scale. And that's another way you can kind of extend these scales. I'll do more of this in another lesson, but I talked about how to use the bass strings. I'm getting that note right there to connect to the open A string there, to connect to that note there on the D string, to complete the lower part of the scale. So I'm going da da da, but playing the D, the B, and then the G strings. I call it like a nonlinear pathways thing. We'll talk about that more in another lesson. But you see I've kind of taken the thumb down here and turned my hand so I'm playing a scale below the thumb rather than, You can also go. Now you'll wonder if we're playing, the C cycle up here. You're going to want the A minor chord. Well, the A minor chord, we could have the thumb kind of jump down here, but that really doesn't add anything. That mostly just restricts our fingers. There's really no advantage to that because we have the open A string. So this leads us into the next type of scale that we're going to look at, which is open position scales. These are a little trickier in that you can kind of mix these in with any of the cycles, but when to use them can be a little confusing because you tend to want to think in these sort of linear patterns. Okay, the thumb goes here, then this finger goes here. I found I tend to get very attached to those, and then when it's all of a sudden, there's no, I don't have to hold any bass notes. Like, what do you do? Well, I'm just going to kind of show you which chords you can play just with open strings without pulsing. I mean, you can always pulse a note. You can always just go A. But But again, we talked about this in the last lesson. That tends to really break the feel up. So I'm going to assume we're going to try to keep at least 2 bass notes going. So when you get to this A minor chord, we've been playing this A minor chord with, the open A and then the open D string, which you can do. But it tends to start to sound like a D chord after a little bit because the open A and the open D would fit in sort of the D cycle of it. So when I'm soloing over this, I'll tend to like really focus on, playing C's, or necessarily the absolute to an E flat, but in this position, I'm thinking of playing C's a lot. Because that fills out the chord more. The other thing I'll do is I'll play the A string and the G string as the bass notes. I tend to still focus on playing, C's wherever I can get them, because that fills out the chord, but this is a whole like A minor 7 chord going on here. We have, the root, the open G is the 7th, and then if you kind of emphasize the note C in the solo, it gives a really nice sense of the A minor harmony. So if I'm playing, something over the C cycle, I'll go. Wind up in the G cycle. But you see how I could kind of like take that A minor moment and sort of explore the neck a lot more. Yeah, excuse me. Because I've got no fingers holding me down to do a bass line, I can go anywhere on the neck. Now, that being said, my bass thumb is playing, everything up to the G string. So that kind of leaves mostly, the B and the E strings really open. Your first and your second strings are totally open, but you've kind of got to be able to get around on those. So what you really want to get comfortable with doing is playing scales sort of straight up one string. So I'll do that A minor pattern. Then I'll if you can cross over onto, the E string, you can use it even more. Now, generally, you don't want to dwell on one chord that long, but when you're practicing this, I highly recommend that you do. Because what you can get away with in a solo is one thing, but when you're preparing to use this stuff in improvisation, you really want to sit in one position. So usually what I do to work on this is I'll spend some time in this one position. When I get to the A minor, really sit on it for a little bit to kind of find some more possibilities. And then as you get faster at that, you'll be able to move through the chord progressions, while you're improvising and not get thrown off by that kind of sudden disembodiment that happens when you're not in, kind of a hybrid position, as it were. So real quick, I'm going to go over the other possible chords you can do in open positions, and I think we're finished. So you can play the A minor chord, of course. You can kind of play with the open D, or you can play it with the open G. You can play the E minor chord. You can play it with the E and the D strings. But that sounds a little dark, I find. Because that 7th, I feel like that kind of throws off the vibe. It hasn't really been used before in the song. So a lot of times I'll also play it with the open G string. of course, if you really, really need to, you can use the A and the D strings to play over a D chord. But generally what you have to do if you're going to do that is try to, like with the A minor chord, you got to emphasize the third of the chord. So I will make sure that F sharp is in the melody. So that when I resolve it, it sounds like a D actually, like a D going to a G. So to recap everything we've done so far, we talked about, playing things in the open position, the way you would do if you kind of just learn the song. We talked about playing things in the second position. We talked about kind of mixing the third position in with the second. Then we talked about going into a thumb position if we need to. And then we can go into a thumb position kind of way up here on the neck when we get to the C cycle. Run out of space in that open position, or at least in that upper thumb position. You're using totally open strings and just soloing on the upper strings. I think that's everything that we covered in this lesson. So as much of that as you can integrate, go for it. I highly recommend you kind of sit on every one chord for a while until you get comfortable with the scales that go over it, with some licks that work over it, and then you gradually work them into your soloing. It's going to take a while to get used to this stuff. As you can see, I'm still kind of in the process of doing it as I make this video, but it's all kind of coming along, and I find the more I work on it, the better it all gets, and it leads to just the coolest places ever. So, all right. Next lesson, we're going to talk about how to weave all those chords together and make it kind of one, complete, neck where you can go anywhere and kind of stay within the changes of the song you're doing. So thanks for sticking with us, and we'll see you in the next lesson.